When the Sun Darkens. Orbital History and 2040 AD Return of Planet Phoenix by Jason M. Breshears. Read by Kevin Stevens, also known as Grendel Dark. Chapter 2. Age of the Phoenix and Cycle of Cataclysm. Time is measured not by the calendar, but by the events that occupy it. Lewis Mumford, Technics and Civilization. Thales lived along the western coast of Asia Minor in Ionia, not far from the ruins of Troy. The empire of his day was Lydia, and by 583 BC, King Elates of Lydia had been engaged in war against the Medes of the east, at the eastern edge of Mesopotamia. This date is exactly 3 years after King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in the days of Daniel, the prophet, and Jeremiah. Persia was growing and would soon overcome the might of Babylon, once allied to Media. This is the backdrop behind this most unusual event. Sun darkening of 583 BC. Herodotus had traveled throughout the ancient world of Greece, the Aegean, Asia Minor, Syria, Babylonia, Persia, Phoenicia, and Egypt, collecting accounts about everything interesting that different peoples believed. He was meticulous, and his discoveries in the histories of various nations were recorded for all posterity in his world-famous Histories, an extensive tome now over 24 centuries old. He wrote, "My business is to record what people say, but I am by no means bound to believe it." With the casual grace of a patient historian, Herodotus set out the following facts. War subsequently broke out between two countries and continued for 5 years, during which both the Lydians and Medes won a number of victories. One battle was fought at night, but then, after 5 years of indecisive warfare, a battle took place in which the armies had already engaged when day was suddenly turned to night. This change from daylight to darkness had been foretold to the Ionians by Thales of Miletus, who fixed the date for it in the year in which it did, in fact, take place. Both Lydians and Medes broke off the engagement when they saw this darkening of the day, for they were more anxious than they had been to conclude peace, and a reconciliation was brought about by Synesis of Sicilia. Herodotus mentions 3 times in this abbreviated passage that the sun darkened, and not once did he refer to the moon. As eclipses in those days were known, but not with predictive value, it was equally known that it was the moon that caused very short-lived, momentary darknesses. Regular eclipses were recorded by Herodotus, and in these episodes, the learned historian clearly mentioned the moon. As Xerxes of Persia marched toward Greece, as recorded by Herodotus, the moon eclipses the sun for a short time. The Persians welcomed this omen as portending their victory over Greekdom, which venerated the sun as opposed to the lunar veneration of Persia and the eastern nations. This occurred just prior to the Battle of Salamis, where, in contradiction to their interpretation of the eclipse, they were defeated by the Hellenic League Greek city-states, led by the warlike Spartans in that year of 481 BC. Herodotus clearly perceived the difference from the 481 BC eclipse involving the moon and the sun darkening event that stopped a raging battle in mid-career in 583 BC. Both Thales and Herodotus have to their credit the support of the unusually intelligent and critical thinker Aristotle, who acknowledges both men as his scientific predecessors. Now, our focus is on the astronomical facts underlying the legend of the Phoenix. At a fixed time, according to Pliny, the sun darkens, and Lucretius asserts that this is caused by some other body that so infrequently appears that its rediscovery in later generations is impeded by the lapse of time. As the Euphratean records, reliefs, and seals depict, Phoenix is a winged planet. Therefore, we are to search for something off the ecliptic plane, a planet that flies in and out of our solar system on an entirely different path around the sun. The ancient traditions claim that Phoenix appeared and darkened the solar orb only every 540 to 550 years, though some sources cite that the period was about 500 years. As the legends are guardians of latent astronomical facts, we must look deeper into the past in our search to unveil this mystery. Because Thales predicted the exact year the sun would darken, we must assume that he had access to historical records concerning this next and more ancient solaric anomaly. Sun darkening of 1135 BC. This amazing year exemplifies how the past forms a predicate for the future. This date is 552 years before the 583 BC darkening of the sun, during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon. But now, in 1135 BC, Nebuchadnezzar I ruled Babylon, and, discovered among his old stone tablet annals, is a record concerning how, in this year, a comet darkened the sun. This fact demonstrates that the Babylonians were aware of the timing of the return of Phoenix, which they believed was a comet, for they named their king Nebuchadnezzar II, knowing that the sun darkening of his centuries-old predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar I, was about to transpire again. And of course, we have seen that in 583 BC, the sun did darken. The concept of kingship is made more profound by the historical fact that in this year of 1135 BC, Tiglath-Pileser I became king of Assyria and began his famous military campaigns, subduing all of Mesopotamia. At this time, the Assyrian monarchs employed as their great seal the winged disc. Historical astronomers have also found that at this date, the Chinese left records that the sun darkened. They would have viewed this from an angle, for the same event is preserved in the Irish traditions concerning the Tuatha De Danann. These people, migrating from continental Europe, campaigned against the prior residents of Ireland and Britain called the Fomori, a race of giants descended from Ham. The two armies of these people met in the Field of Towers and committed to war in the Battle of Moratura. Just as had happened in 583 BC, now, in 1135 BC, during the battle, the sun darkened. This fierce war is recorded in the annals of Clonmacnois. The Danann were of mixed ancestry, Semitic Achaeans that fought against the Trojans at Troy for King Agamemnon of Mycenae. As at Troy, the Danann engaged the enemy Fomori of Ireland in opposing camps separated by a duel between two champions that would fight in single combat. This was the heroic code, exactly how Israel would face the Philistines in 1027 BC when David slew the giant Goliath, the Philistine champion. The Philistines were exceptionally tall, shown as much taller than the Egyptians on temple reliefs at Karnak, and were descended from Ham. The Danann of Achaia were originally Greeks who integrated culturally with the migrating maritime Israelite tribe of Dan that departed Canaan after having failed to defeat the Rephaim and Anakim giants in their allotted portions of the inherited lands of Israel. Interestingly, the geographical regions that were to be Dan's inheritance were occupied by the Philistine cities of Ashdod, Askelon, and Joppa. Phoenix is described in the Babylonian records as a comet. This is not an inaccurate assessment. However, as it will be seen, Phoenix is larger than any known comet. Having a frozen exterior surface that begins burning off into a long tail millions of miles long, ever pointing away from the sun, a comet is merely a tiny object in comparison with the enormous size of planet Phoenix. Their similarity lies with the fact that Phoenix, too, is encapsulated in immense glacial sheets that begin to burn off into a spectacular cloud-like tail that engulfs the Earth, darkening the sun. This is akin to the traditions of Venus, which the early Maya recorded was a planet that exhibited a tail. In fact, any moon, planet, or fragment encased in frozen liquid seas or oceans that approaches too closely to the sun's surface will give off a brilliant tail. But before we speculate any more further on the nature of Phoenix, let us peer even further back into the mists of time in our search of an event 552 years before the sun darkening of 1135 BC. Sun darkening of 1687 BC. For over 100 years prior to this distant date, there was an expansive human population explosion throughout the world. Cities made of stone were erected everywhere, all with sacred temple precincts, and most of them were oriented around pyramid structures as the nations of the world attempted to replicate the Great Pyramid standing at Giza in Egypt, as this author's prior work, Lost Scriptures of Giza, serves to show. Also provided in this book is the history of an extremely old and interesting book known as the Book of Jasher, a text often confused with its forgeries. The Jasher text is twice mentioned in the Old Testament scriptures as a credible source of historical information concerning the world in patriarchal times. Within this ancient Hebraic record, we learn why the sons of Jacob killed all the men of Shechem, as detailed in the Genesis narrative. The king of Shechem, a Canaanite, took by force the sister of Jacob's sons, Dinah. Her indignant brothers slew Shechem, and the news spread rapidly throughout Canaan, which at that time was filled with Amorite garrisons from the kingdom of Mitanni, the Amorite capital being Mari. Biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, in his Secrets of Time, along with some other historians, date the rape of Dinah using the Jasher and other Hebraic writings at the year 1687 BC. It was in this year, within weeks after the sons of Jacob slaughtered the men of Shechem, that the kings of Canaan, with Amorite troops, assembled for war against the house of Jacob, a mighty host of 13 kings, with a force divided into 7 hosts, led by the Amorite king of gigantic stature named Jashub of the city of Tapnach. Following him were many of those descended from the giants. As Jacob's sons and their trained servants, 112 men in all, prepared their armor and weapons of war, the patriarch Jacob despaired and cried into the sky, asking for God's deliverance. And when Jacob ceased praying to the Lord, the earth shook from its place, and the sun darkened. And all these kings were terrified, and a great consternation seized them. And the Lord hearkened to the prayer of Jacob, and the Lord impressed the hearts of all the kings and their host with the terror and awe of the sons of Jacob. This was, in fact, a global cataclysm that ended several thriving civilizations. Many of the mounds throughout Israel and Jordan today cover burned strata that date to this period. The unusual megalithic cities that baffle archaeologists today because of their most unbelievable locales were destroyed in these worldwide quakes. The earliest megalithic layers of Crete and Mycenae were formed from the collapse of their once mighty structures, and archaeologists assert that these civilizations met with disaster around 1645 BC. In a span of 37 centuries, the 42-year variance between this approximate date and the actual 1687 BC year is a virtual bullseye. Strewn throughout the ruins where the builders dropped them have been discovered tools, as if the construction work was abandoned and men fled in haste. This would support the occurrence of an earthquake. One fascinating discovery underneath the ruins of Crete at Knossos was the gruesome find at the mountain shrine of Amenosphelia, where archaeologists discovered a collapsed temple, wherein the skeleton of a youth was found still bound to a shrine where he was about to be sacrificed. A bronze dagger for the deed was laying beside him. The temple ruins were preserved because the mountain collapsed upon it. This sensational find was made in 1981 AD. Several of the world's coastlines were permanently changed, and entire regions thickly populated vanished underneath the waves. Among them was the famous Canaanite city of Joppa, washed out by a tsunami. In South America, the ancient port city of Tiwanaku was thrust 12,000 feet into the sky as the Andes Mountains were pushed upward, altering the entire American Pacific Atlantic coastlines and causing to be abandoned other cities such as Machu Picchu, which was now too cold and high to adequately support crops or comfortable living conditions. When the Spanish explored the ruins of Tiwanaku, they were told by the locals that it was a major city constructed after the flood by giants, who disregarded a prophecy of the coming of the sun, which led to their demise. This prophecy was probably none other than the astronomical knowledge of the return of Phoenix to darken the sun and destroy parts of the earth that was to transpire in 1687 BC. The ruins are littered with monoliths weighing from 60 to 200 tons that had been riveted together with silver bolts, removed by the Spanish. Tiwanaku's artifacts have been radiocarbon dated at approximately 1700 BC, which is only 13 years off. Leading credence to the traditions of gigantic men at Tiwanaku is the discovery by archaeologists of enormous human skulls at the site that had once belonged to colossal men that stood 9 to 10 feet tall. This corroborates the biblical account of the height of Goliath the giant, who stood 9 feet 9 inches tall. Evidence of cataclysm near Tiwanaku is found north of the city in the enormous ruins of Pumapunka, where 27-foot-long andesite blocks weighing as much as 300 tons were strewn about by some tremendous force. Bolivia's National Archaeological Institute has dated the massive ruins at 1700 BC. West of Tiwanaku have been discovered greater monuments such as large gateways with hinges, platforms, and porches made of a single stone. Also, enormous gateways made of great masses of stone, some of which were 30 feet long and 15 feet high and 6 feet thick. The megalithic doors with jambs and lintels, all hewn cleverly from a single block, are characteristic of those same peculiar rock doors found by Porter north of Israel in the region of Bashan, now located in modern Syria and Lebanon, a territory anciently belonging to the Rephaim giants, famous in the Old Testament. Other sites dated at this time that have the same unusual polygonal and megalithic masonry are the ruins of Palenque, Cusco, Calisaya, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, as well as those in the jungle depths of the Yucatan. Just a day's walk from the ruins of Bashan lies a truly gargantuan cut and dressed stone still lying in situ in its quarry at Baalbek in Lebanon, a single stone 69 feet in length. 3 more enormous stones, called the trilithons, were raised to a high position and set in the walls of a foundation for some unusually large platform, said in the earliest records of the site to have been the location of a pre-flood city. Archaeologists have noted that the project seemed to have come to an abrupt halt, for the craftsman's tools were found lying about the site and the building remained unfinished. It appeared that the site was being rebuilt after it had been in a ruinous condition for a long time. As Baalbek parallels Tiwanaku, this Andean anomaly also mirrors the ruins far off the coast of Peru in the South Pacific, known simply as Easter Island. Easter Island was once the center of a mighty island empire, controlling a vast archipelago of island kingdoms until the ocean level raised considerably, or the seafloor lowered, plunging countless islands beneath the waves. All over Easter Island are half-buried statues, wearing unusual hats, and mare, platform pyramids, along with what archaeologists have found to be most puzzling, a heroic statue 70 feet long still lying in the quarry. Like the Baalbek monolith, this statue is still attached to natural rock. Further mirroring Baalbek, at the Easter Island areas where the giant heads were being erected, archaeologists have found the craftsman's tools still lying where they were dropped when all construction ceased. Entire workshops strewn with tools that were never touched again. The islanders claim that ever since the disaster, traveling overseas was discontinued. Far north of Easter Island in the Pacific, on Ponape Island, between Japan and Hawaii, are the basalt ruins of the city of Metalinum. This great city is 11 square miles of earthworks and megalithic masonry, colossal pillars, temple edifices, and artificial waterways of dense basement stone that could have maintained a population of 2 million people. The city was destroyed by quakes and flooding and an evident alteration of its coasts. For a long period of time, Metalinum was underwater. We have no written records or traditions concerning it. The same fate, at the same time, ended the civilization on Yap Island in the Carolinas. This catastrophe did not pass by China unnoticed. A series of yellow fogs, a famine, and the darkening of the sun revealed the mandate of heaven that kingship in China must be changed, and this disaster brought an end to the ruling Qi dynasty as the Tang dynasty emerged. In the year 279 BC, grave robbers in the Honan province of China excavated a royal tomb and discovered what has come to be called the Bamboo Books. In these texts, we learn that a terrible cataclysmic episode occurred in 1688 BC, 1-year variance, of terrible earthquakes and strange astronomical omens, as well as a rain of meteoric rock. This dating and disaster is confirmed in Chinese seals. A fragment of the Bamboo Books reads, 17. The Emperor Kui, in his 10th year, and in Shin, 29th of the cycle, the 5 planets went out of their courses. In the night the stars fell like rain. The earth shook. The Jie and the Zhou rivers in Honan became dry. Asia provides us with more detailed data on this event. The cultures of the Gobi and Taklamakan deserts of China were once thriving forests of people and trees, but the climate of the region was drastically altered. This may be related to an observation made by the prolific researcher David Hatcher Childress, who wrote that the Mongols called the Gobi Desert by the name of Shamo, which he believes is akin to the Middle Eastern deity named Shamos, who was worshipped as a black star that was considered an evil heavenly body. Planet Phoenix. Also in Cambodia lies the formerly lost city of Angkor Wat, another city where archaeologists excavating the earlier parts of the ruins found that it was littered with stone tools that were left behind. Angkor Wat was abandoned, reoccupied, deserted, and discovered again several times in its long history. Pliny the Elder died during the volcanic activity of Vesuvius in 79 AD. At this time, the Roman luxury cities of Herculaneum and Pompeii were buried, and archaeologists have excavated marvel after marvel of preserved human bodies, animals, and priceless artifacts, as well as frescoes and murals. But these scientists have found something even more profound. Unbeknownst to the Romans, Herculaneum and Pompeii were built directly over more archaic settlements that had been themselves buried under the wrath of Vesuvius. Geologists have found that this prior eruption buried everything 90 miles from the volcano, and testing has set this earlier volcanic entombment at approximately 1780 BC. This is merely a professional estimate, albeit a good one. It is only 93 years off from 1687 BC. Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England, is one of the most misunderstood monuments in the world. Sir Norman Lockyer studied the site and concluded, after extensive research, that the Stonehenge complex was erected in 1680 BC. His dating is, of course, 7 years off. However, he merely discovered the date it was toppled and renovated, being Stonehenge 3. Perhaps not a coincidence, this intriguing fact was published on pages 5 and 52 of David Davidson's monumental book, The Great Pyramid, Its Divine Message. Note again, the 552-year cycle. Sun darkening of 2239 BC. It is imperative that the reader know that this author did not date the deluge. The 2239 BC date derives from the meticulous chronology of Stephen Jones in his Secrets of Time, a timeline incorporating the biblical chronologies, Hebraic extracanonical works, and Assyrian astronomical records. We arrive here simply by adding 552 years to 1687 BC. The Great Deluge nearly wiped out humanity. The mechanism by which the whole world was destroyed was by a comet impact 7 days after the transit of Phoenix. Rabbinical records indicate that the flood was caused by the appearance of 2 stars, one being Phoenix and the other a comet that crashed into Earth, initiating the flooding. The Great Flood is fully detailed in this author's work, Anunnaki Homeworld. The comet impacted in the area of the Gulf of Mexico. The antiquarian and author Frank Joseph, in his book The Destruction of Atlantis, cites several traditions and records concerning the darkening of the sun at the deluge. But one such text that escaped him is our cherished Book of Jasher, and in this early Hebrew historical chronology of the ancient world, we read that 7 days before the flood, the Lord caused the whole earth to shake, and the sun darkened, and the foundations of the world raged, and the whole earth was moved violently, and the lightning flashed, and the thunder roared, and all the fountains in the earth were broken up, such as was not known to the inhabitants before. And God did this mighty act, in order to terrify the sons of men, that there might not be more evil upon the earth. And at the end of 7 days, the waters of the flood were upon the earth. Planet Phoenix transited, darkening the sun 7 days before the flood commenced. Dr. Frederick Philby, author of The Flood Reconsidered, theorized that the deluge may have been caused by the close pass of a wandering minor planet that collapsed the marine canopy once enveloping Earth. This theory is supported by the geographer Donald Patton, author of The Biblical Flood and the Ice Epoch. He believes that not only did a planet come too close to the Earth, but this body carried with it comet-like debris that rained on Earth, and that some of the water contributed to the flood. The Phoenix appearance in this year explains why the black sun has been associated with stories of the flood. The legend of the Phoenix began with the transit of Phoenix between Earth and the sun's surface in antiquity, when Phoenix was covered in a layer of frozen liquid. The planet's proximity to the sun melted the ice and created a thick tail of gases and rock detritus that fragmented off the surface of the dead planet. The tail, just as with comets, points away from the sun due to solar wind, and to the people of Earth long ago, this spectacle appeared as a celestial sword approaching the planet, a symbol for judgment from God. When Earth passed into this tail of debris, planet Phoenix was directly between Earth and the sun, and the tail in the skies, as seen from the surface of our world, would have appeared as vapory wings enveloping the sun, causing the solar light to be choked out to a dull, dark, brown dullness. The winged disk was the seal of those kings that ruled over men during the age of the Phoenix. The Phoenix legend died out after 583 BC, some Greek naturalists and writers even assuming ridiculously that the Phoenix was a bird that periodically migrated to Egypt. This was a desperate attempt to account for the cogent fascination of the ancients in the appearance of something they called Phoenix. From a variety of early textual sources from Greek historians, Babylonian annals, Irish traditions in the annals of Clonmacnois, biblical and Hebraic texts, Chinese bamboo books, and seal inscriptions, as well as input from modern authors and chronologists, we have in these few pages easily reconstructed the astronomical phenomenon underlying the badly misunderstood, yet historically persistent legend of the Phoenix. With a casual walk through the pages of history, we now understand how Thales predicted the darkening of the sun, why Lucretius believed the sun darkenings were caused by some unknown body, and why Pliny stressed that these eclipses of the sun were unusually long. By unearthing the past, do we see the future, and this tenet is no less true as when acknowledged by Thales. Phoenix still orbits the sun. It has been seen by modern astronomers. It will return at a fixed time. It is seen with perfect clarity in the apocalyptic book of Revelation. But first, we must look even further back through history into the times before the flood, even into the pre-Adamic world.